Alexander Isak is the name on everyone's lips for the striker Arsenal should sign this summer. But for me, he's not the guy. There are four main reasons why, and it's nothing to do with what he does on the pitch, but it's the effects of the transfers off the pitch. I'm going to take you through all of my reasons this morning, so let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Arsenal Unfiltered, your 3 times a week dose of Arsenal coverage with me, your host Mark. Wherever you are, I hope you are well. It is 6:37 this morning, so I hope you are, if you're picking this up as soon as I release it, I hope you're enjoying a morning coffee. I hope the start to your week hasn't been too bad, and you are looking forward to Arsenal being back in exactly a week's time. Yeah, so Alexander Isak is the topic for today, and like I said in the start, I don't think he's the guy for us this summer, and there's 4 main reasons why. I'm going to take you through those 4 reasons this morning, but I want to start by saying he is clearly an unbelievable player, and if Arsenal do go and sign him, Arsenal will be better for it. My kind of feeling around this transfer is mainly based around the risk, because I think there is a world where Arsenal go and spend a huge amount of money on Alexander Isak, and it works perfectly, and it's the solution that we've all been waiting for. It gives Martin Odegaard and Bukayo Saka a real excellent target in the middle. It takes the load off of a number of players. It wins us those games against low blocks where we've struggled for a moment of quality. Alexander Isak has moments of quality coming out of his ears. He is a terrific player, so it's nothing to do with what he is like on the pitch, because I think that world where he comes in and changes Arsenal forever is a real possibility. But I also think as much as that is a possibility, there is a possibility where things don't work out. Every transfer is a coin flip, right? And this would be the biggest coin flip Arsenal have done. I'm trying to think since when? Maybe since the Pepe transfer? I mean, that was a big one, wasn't it? We broke our record transfer fee of 72 million. Of course, we've since beaten that with Declan Rice, but I don't think that was as much of this might go one way or the other. I think that was a pretty sure thing. So let's get into it. Let's get started. I'm sure I've waited 3 minutes for giving anyone a reason as to why I don't think Alexander Isak is the guy, contrary to a lot of opinions. And I want to also mention I'm not doing this for clickbait. This is genuinely an opinion that I hold, and whilst, like I say, he will be, if Arsenal sign him, he will be a terrific signing for the Arsenal. I think the risk is a really big risk. The reasons why then, let's start with the other signings that Arsenal need to do. So Alexander Isak is going to cost somewhere between 120 and 150 million. That seems to be the report. This transfer rumour has been going on since basically kind of autumn, winter time. So it's been a long time that we've been talking about this transfer. And of course, recently it's been added to the reports that Liverpool, they're probably part of that conversation as well. They're looking to potentially replace Mohamed Salah. We don't know what's going to go on with his future. And they obviously need someone as well to take the burden off of Mohamed Salah. They can't carry on with Darwin Núñez and Diogo Jota. So they need a player. A couple of other teams need a striker. Chelsea probably are looking in the striker market, and they've got money to burn, of course. So it's really interesting place. So Newcastle are going to be able to run this price up, and the reports are kind of capping out at 150 million. Especially, Newcastle get into the Champions League, they are in no position where they need to sell him. They do not need to sell Alexander Isak. They'll get in the Champions League. They'll have plenty of money. They'll have the Champions League to be able to say, look, we've just won a trophy this year. We're in the Champions League. Stay for another season. Help us in this first campaign. And if you still really, really want to go, we'll probably be able to get some good money out from you, because you'll still have 2 years left on your contract. But Arsenal, well, one can't wait. That's a big problem. We can't afford to wait for Alexander Isak to be available. But we also need a huge number of other players in other positions. So we're looking at a backup keeper, as Neto's loan will obviously finish. We're looking at 1 to 2 midfielders. One's probably going to be Zubimendi, but actually we're losing both Jorginho and Partey. And we're thinking, okay, we probably want another player in there. Rice obviously can still play 6, but then if we lost Zubamendi, you're looking at Rice, Marino, Ødegaard, and I'm not sure we want that to play every single game. We need a winger, I think. Trossard is 30. He is kind of aging out of the team. Martinelli's form has not been what we wanted. I'm still of the opinion that left wing spot is the spot we can upgrade the most and improve the team the most. I think if we buy a striker to replace Havertz, the upgrade from a new striker from Havertz is not as big as the potential upgrade from a new winger from Martinelli. So I think that's an option. And of course, we might also need another number 10. In that kind of 8-10 role that Ødegaard plays. Yes, we've seen Ethan Nwaneri develop this year, and I think he could provide cover for Ødegaard, of course, but he is also going to probably provide the cover for Saka with how well he's played on the right wing. And actually, we might want to say Ødegaard can't do this all on his own, We might want to add someone just to give him another mate, another help support act kind of thing. So if we spent 150 million, well, even let's put it at the lower end of the spectrum, right? 120 million on Alexander Isak. Even if you break that over multiple transfer windows, I think that means we are almost certainly having to sell someone to fund those moves. And even then, are we going to fund those moves even if we sell someone else? That's a really tough financial position. Look, we know Arsenal are in a good spot from PSR rules and from the UEFA rules as well, but you're still only allowed to lose 105 million over 3 years. So even if you broke these payments over the 3 years, you are potentially spending a huge amount of that loss in the very early stages of his Arsenal career. We would potentially really limit everything that we're going to do. So I think those areas are just as important, especially the midfielders with Partey and Jorginho probably going. We have to do something in those areas. To spend that amount of money would really, really restrict those areas. So that's reason number one. I think we've got too much other business to do, and I don't think we can wait another transfer window or another season to bring in a striker. Reason number two, before I go on a break, is the quality of the other options. So the number 9 market is a really tough market at the moment. Isak is the player that is on everyone's lips. Lots of people want him. The last time I sort of really remember this being, the window being like this is when Haaland was at Dortmund. Real Madrid were in for him, Manchester City were in for him, Manchester United were in for him. Everyone kind of wanted a piece of the Erling Haaland pie, and everyone wanted to get him at their club. I think with Pep Guardiola's influence, he was always going to go there, but there was this kind of saga, and everyone was talking about this guy who he could come into any team, right? He could come into any team and make them better. I think Alexander Isak fits that profile of player. He could stroll into, could he stroll into Real Madrid and make them better? I think he probably could. Could you put Vinicius Jr. out on the right and play Isak through the middle and Mbappe off the left? Something like that. I don't know, but he's not going to make them worse. That's for certain. He is an unbelievable player. And Real Madrid is really the only team where you're looking at it and thinking, maybe he doesn't make that team better. He certainly makes Barcelona better. He certainly adds something to Manchester City. I think that would solve their left wing problem, which they've just really not managed to solve for a little while. He definitely makes Liverpool better. Looking at all of these big teams that are at the pinnacle of their leagues right now, he would add to all of them in the same way that Haaland would. But he is the name. He is the name. There are not many other people available who are at that kind of level. Well, in fact, there's no one else who is available at that kind of level. And there is a lot of clubs who want a number 9. The kind of next level down are the Seskos, the Ekatikes of this world, which Arsenal have also been linked with. And look, we don't really have a price rumour for Ekatike, but for Sesko, it's probably going to be around half the price of an Alexander Isak. We're talking 60, 70 million, I think. It's kind of the rumour. I think last summer it was looking more like the 50, 55. But he's probably gone up with his season so far this year. Another year of experience, of course. So is he half the player of Alexander Isak? Taking the first point around we need to do a lot of other business. If we sign Sesko, do we get half the results we get out of Isak for half the price? I don't think that's true. Maybe you get a 20-goal season out of Sesko and a 30-goal season out of Isak, or a 15 and a 25, something like that. Is another £70 million worth that? I'm not sure it is, especially when you can probably create that in other areas. If you add in a winger as well, not only do you have a lot more depth and a lot more kind of tactical options, you probably get a similar amount of output for a similar amount of price. So I feel like that's a smarter option. And of course, we already have Kai Havertz, and I know there will be people rolling their eyes at that, going, Mark, you cannot compare Isak to Havertz. I'm not comparing Isak to Havertz. Obviously, Isak is a far better forward than Kai Havertz is. However, Kai Havertz is still a really, really impactful player at Arsenal. Only Bukayo Saka has more goals and assists this year. Kai Havertz has 19 goals and assists in only half a season. He broke his goal-scoring record for Chelsea last season at Arsenal, and he broke that already up until February for Arsenal again this season. He was really on the way to having a very, very productive season. I would not have been surprised if he got to just under 30 goals and assists this year, which would have been a fantastic return for a midfielder playing up front. That's how people always refer to him. They don't call him an out-and-out striker, and personally, I think he is judged very, very harshly because of that. So if we sign, let's take the two scenarios again. You sign a 120 to 150 million pound striker in Alexander Isak. What do you do with Kai Havertz? Because I don't think Arsenal fans are super impressed with him in the number 8 position. And if we did put him in the number 8 position, what does that say for Mikel Merino? What does that say? Does that mean Declan Rice is moving back to 6 as well? And then what do you say to Zubamendi? How do you balance the team? That's a really important thing that Arsenal need to think about. Can you leave a player that you signed for £65 million on the bench every week, just giving them token minutes here and there because you've brought the guy, the guy? And I go back to the left wing discussion. It's much easier, and I know we won't like this because Martinelli came in when he was a kid, and we kind of think of him as kind of one of our own. It is much easier to drop Gabriel Martinelli than it is Kai Havertz from a financial point of view. You've invested £6 million in Gabriel Martinelli, and I think we probably got our money's worth 2 seasons ago. And if we do sell Gabriel Martinelli one day, we will make a very, very handsome profit off of him. But because we signed him for £6 million, it's a lot easier to bench him than Kai Havertz. Now, take the other example of, let's say we bring in a Sesko or an Ekitike. You can rotate Sesko and Ekitike with Havertz much, much more easily and say, actually, guys, you are on a level playing field here. You've both cost a similar amount, probably Kai will have slightly higher wages to start with, but, I'm sure the new signings will be aspiring to his wages at some point. You can easily kind of bring them in and out of the team, give them minutes at different times, and actually I think that creates a much more neat story. You're not looking at, there's a world where we sign Alexander Isak and we've got £200 million worth of forwards, maybe over £200 million worth of forwards, and you're going, how do we get them both in the team? How do we give them both enough minutes? It's really difficult to do, whereas I think it's a much more simpler solution with a Sesko and a Havertz who has played very well and probably doesn't deserve to be dropped at this point. And, I think there are other areas of the pitch where we can probably go for a big superstar name and complete that process of moving a player onto the bench or out of the team far, far more easily than up front with Kai Havertz. £65 million Kai Havertz, remember. Okay, I'm going to take a break before I come back. I'm going to take a break, and after I come back even, I'm going to do my final 2 reasons of why Arsenal shouldn't sign Alexander Isak. Hello everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you're like me, you finished watching an Arsenal game and you're already looking for the next bit of Arsenal coverage you can find. If that sounds like you, follow or subscribe to Arsenal Unfiltered on your podcast app of choice right now to make sure you don't miss a single episode from me. I'm here 3 times a week, reviewing matches and covering Arsenal news, and I'm so excited to have you all here as well. Thank you very much. Welcome back to this special episode of Arsenal Unfiltered, why Arsenal shouldn't sign Alexander Isak. Okay, you heard start of the show, We need to also do other business. So can we afford the money for Isak? Noting we've got to sign players in other areas. And the quality of some of the other options out there, are they half the players for half the price? We're going to come on to two really important things now as well. Number one is the wages. Now, I don't know what Alexander Isak is on right now. I think, you go on Transfermarkt and you get kind of a rumour, really. We don't really know because as well as weekly kind of money, most players are on significant bonus packages, significant performance packages. So actually the total amount of pay, and of course sponsorships are often tied to which club you're playing at, the total amount of pay can be really, really different to what's online. But if you sign a player for 120 to 150 million pounds, I'm telling you right now, those guys and any agent worth his salt is asking for a humongous pay packet. I mean, absolutely ginormous. He would cost, I think he would quickly become the highest earner in the club. I don't think there's any question about that, surpassing Gabriel Jesus and Kai Havertz at Arsenal. So, that for one is a worry. I think we are in a position where previously we had a fantastic wage structure and we were really strict to it, but now we have players who we're just going to have to start breaking that wage structure and probably come up with a new wage structure for. I think we've already done that for Kai Havertz in some senses, and I'm sure Bukayo Saka's new deal and potentially William Saliba's new deal will continue to break that wage structure, right? And rightly so. Real Madrid will pay that money for either of those two players. So if we want to be competing with the best, we are going to have to pay like the best. Wages is the most, highly correlated with success in the Premier League. The more wages you pay, typically the higher your position in the Premier League, give or take a position or two. So we are going to have to pay that sort of money. Can we afford that is my question. Is that our only route to success? Arsenal fans, first and foremost, are desperate to win the Premier League. And then I think we'd all love to win the Champions League, but at least go very, very deep in the Champions League. We want to be one of those last four teams, right? We were close last year against Bayern. Maybe that tie could have and should have gone slightly differently. But we want to be in that equation, and we certainly want to be winning the Premier League. Is the only way to do that going and spending huge amounts of money? Well, I think I think you are, like I said just now, you're going to have to spend huge amounts of money, but I think we probably need to do it in a more sensible way than just lumping it in one player. I think, like I say, if you buy a Sesko and a left winger, do you get the same output as one Alexander Isak for, let's say, the same transfer money? But also, if you sign the right ages, definitely less wages, right? That's one thing I think we can all get behind. If you sign a player for 150 million, they're going to demand a humongous packet, and huge performance-related bonuses. But if you sign a kind of two players who are younger and are maybe on, let's say, 120,000 each, okay, Sesko's pretty young. He might be around that mark. I don't know his current wage packet, but let's say they're around there. That would be 240,000 if they're both on that. Yes, you'll have bonuses that you need to pay, but you've probably saved them in your transfer fees anyway. So I'm thinking that's probably a better scenario than 250 plus on Alexander Isak every single week. I think he'll be looking to be up there. Kai Havertz, I think, is rumoured at £280,000 a week for Arsenal, so he will certainly be wanting to be up there. So, you could sign young players who are going to give you a similar sort of output. Let's say two young players for a similar sort of output at £130,000, £140,000 a week, and be spending the same or less wages, but you're getting two players. I think that is a much better way of doing it. And of course, if you do that for Alexander Isak, what's Bukayo Saka going to request? If you go even higher than Kai Havertz's wage for Alexander Isak, Bukayo Saka is going to be looking at that and going, hang on, I've been here since the start. You can't sign a player like Alexander Isak without me. So I want that money. I'm not trying to put words in Bukayo Saka's mouth or make him out to be materialistic. I think it would be the same for any player in that scenario. I think, players want parity, and we're probably seeing that a little bit with the Gabriel thing. There's no way that Gabriel is not a little bit upset around Saliba's contract being so big in comparison to his at the moment. And I'm sure that the Saudi interest is partly driven by his agent and his agent's frustration. about that situation, because they're both contributing very, very similar things to the team. So, there is a need to match up parity and give parity in squads. So I think it would be a real risk adding in a player that is going to demand that kind of wage packet. And for the final reason, and just before I do this reason, I want to emphasise that, if this signing does happen, if Arsenal do go and do this signing, I'm not in the position where I'm saying we shouldn't sign him because he's a bad player. If we went and got him, I would be so excited, so excited, and I would probably put all of these worries to the side and go, okay, well, if it doesn't work, we can revisit this conversation. But actually, time to get behind him. This has happened now. Let's cross our fingers that everything works out. We go and win the Premier League. We've got plenty of money to do our other business, all of that sort of stuff. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying right now, I think the risk is really, really high with Alexander Isak. And that is the fourth reason. We've spoken about the money. We've spoken about the wages, the other signings that Arsenal need to do, some of the other options out there. But the general risk is my number one thing. And I thought this when we signed Declan Rice, even though he was as close to a sure thing as I think you could get as the right fit for Arsenal. He was already in London, all of that sort of stuff. He was a really, really sensible signing for Arsenal. But injury can happen to anyone. Anyone can get hurt. We've seen it this year. Bukayo Saka and Kai Havertz were two players that I think we all in our head just thought would not get injured, could not get injured. We've seen Bukayo Saka do mega seasons, playing so many 90s, and we're going, he's fine. He's doing okay. Like, he keeps producing no matter how tired and how worn out he is. He's still there, and then obviously he goes down with a hamstring. Kai Havertz, similar sort of thing. He just kept playing and playing and playing, and it didn't look like he was slowing down until that Wolves game where he collapsed on the floor at the end, and everyone was like, oh, this is bad. 2 weeks later, he was injured. So that can happen to anyone. Alexander Isak could turn up at Arsenal and, in the same way that it happened to Jurrien Timber, do his ACL in his second game and we lose him for a year. £150 million, and we could just lose him. That's a huge risk. Every transfer is a risk, but if you spend £60 million on someone, you still have manoeuvrability with other bits of your squad. And if they get injured, you can probably still create results and create kind of output in other ways, because you can go and get other players and do other things and be creative in certain ways. If you spend £150 million on a player and they get injured, you've kind of rolled your dice and you have no more. I'm going to mix metaphors here. You've played your cards and you have no more cards left to play. That's my big worry. And of course, the price tag puts pressure on people. Now, I've pulled up a list of the kind of top 10, top 11 transfers over 100 million euros, I believe this is. But it's, it's a proxy for it, isn't it? It's not over 100 million pounds, but it's a proxy for it. I just want to go through some of the highlights here. So there's obviously big names at the top. João Felix, Mbappe and Neymar top that list. They are kind of way out ahead. Number 4, Enzo Fernandez to Chelsea in 2023. I don't think that one's worked out in any way, shape or form. He's been better this year, of course he has. But 120 million euros, he's not that guy. Antoine Griezmann in a joint 5th, 120 million euros from Atletico Madrid to Barcelona in 2019. 2 years later, he was back at Atletico Madrid. So that tells you how that transfer went. Moises Caicedo to Chelsea, 117 million euros. Again, a player that's improving, but 117 million euros. I mean, just look at that there. Chelsea have spent 250 million on a midfield two that they're a good midfield two, but you'd hardly call them the best in the league. Look at Newcastle's midfield: Guimaraes, Tonali, and Joelinton. That is a far better midfield than Fernandes and Caicedo. So, I think that's a really interesting comparison. Jack Grealish to Manchester City has not worked. Lukaku to Chelsea for 115 million euros from Inter Milan that time has not worked. Ousmane Dembele, a great case study, this one, because when he went to Barcelona for 105 million euros, that signing did not work for Barcelona. But he is absolutely killing it at PSG this year, where he's been transferred to since. It's all about the location, It's a huge amount of money for Dembele that they've spent, and it just didn't work at Barcelona for whatever reason. Now he's at PSG and he's loving life. And I keep scrolling down. Of course, there are the transfers that do work. Jude Bellingham to Real Madrid, Gareth Bale to Real Madrid, obviously worked. Harry Kane to Bayern Munich, that's worked. But the two that really interested me, when I was scrolling down this list, you're talking humongous names there, right? Players that are, even if it hasn't worked out at some clubs, it works out eventually for them. At 18th and 19th on this list are Antony to Manchester United and Harry Maguire to Manchester United. Now, look, Harry Maguire's improved. I don't think he is as bad as kind of the media like to make out. Antony has obviously gone to Betis and is doing a lot better. But neither of those players are £100 million players. And, they were bad transfers at the start. That list, I think, has some players who should never have been £100 million players and some players who are absolutely £100 million players, but it just didn't work for them. And I worry that Alexander Isak sits in that second camp. I worry that he might sit in that camp. You are really rolling the dice with this amount of money. It's a real chance game, 50-50, toss of the coin. And some of these players are brilliant players. I think Griezmann's probably the best example. A fantastic player. Went to Barcelona. It didn't quite work. He was back at Atletico Madrid 2 years later. And again, is a fantastic player once more. Environment matters, and you are not 100% certain when a player comes in that they're going to be perfect. So spending over £100 million on a player feels like a huge amount. I'm going to leave it there, guys. That was why Arsenal shouldn't sign Alexander Isak. He is a top quality player, a brilliant player, and if he did come to Arsenal, he would most certainly add quality. He would most certainly improve Arsenal, and he would probably, I think, pull Arsenal to a Premier League should all of the other issues that I've spoken about not rear their head. But there are those issues and those worries there. Can we be in a good enough financial position to do the other business we need to do as well? Are the other options half as bad as Alexander Isak for half the price? How will we maintain our wage structure and, of course, the general risk around such an expensive transfer? I'm going to leave it there, like I say. I will be back for some more podcasts this week, but it's not until Tuesday next week that we play Fulham because we are not in the FA Cup and it's an FA Cup weekend this weekend. So I will be looking for more topics like this, discussing more issues around the Arsenal in general, and there'll probably be an episode of the Arsenal Roundup, of course, and I might even do an early preview of the Fulham game because I think that might be quite nice to do a deep dive on that. So that's the week coming up on kind of what I'm bringing to you. Like I said, in the middle, if you have enjoyed this episode or any episode of Arsenal Unfiltered, please consider giving me a follow or leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts from. It is super helpful to grow this podcast. Lets me know what you like, what you don't like, so I can keep bringing you quality content 3 times a week. All that's left to say now is thank you for following, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you very, very soon.